Let's now take a look at some of the global features that are available in ES-2. Up top here we have some of the voicing controls. So let me turn this oscillator back on, set the mix all the way to 100% oscillator 1. Poly means you can play multiple notes at a time. And the number of voices that you could play at the same time can be changed by clicking and dragging over here. So the maximum is 32. And of course the minimum is 1. But that no longer is polyphonic. It's kind of like monophonic. So switching over to monophonic. Monophonic means I can only play one note at a time. If I play one note and then immediately play another note, it's going to cancel the previous note and only the next note is going to play. So that's your monophonic mode. In monophonic mode, these voices do kind of work. Right now it's not going to make much of a difference, but let's say I set it to 6 and I turn on unison. So what that means is there's going to be 6 copies of this one oscillator running at the same time. So by default, it's just going to sound louder. But if I click and drag over here in this analog dial, I can detune those voices. And we can get a nice fat sound. But if that analog dial is set all the way to 0, it doesn't sound that interesting. So that's the unison feature. Now in legato mode, we basically act very much similar to the monophonic mode, except that every subsequent note skips the attack section. So let me explain that. So envelope 3 by default is the envelope, the amplitude envelope for the sound. So if I give this a long attack, now if I don't play in a legato fashion, you hear the attack on every note. But if I play legato, that means without leaving a gap between every subsequent note, you can see that attack only happens on the very first note, but all the subsequent notes don't have any attack. So that's basically your legato feature. Now this over here is a global tuning, so let me set that attack back to 0. So I can change the tuning, make it sharp by 50 cents or flat by 50 cents. Now this applies to all 3 oscillators. Okay, that sounds strange because we have all these things on. So you can hear all 3 oscillators are being tuned sharp or flat. CBT here, which is something I don't use much, it basically changes your tuning from well-tempered to stretch tuning. So if it's all the way to 100%, that means as you go higher up, the notes get sharper, and as you go lower, the notes get a bit flat. It's not very obvious, but if you ever use that, you can always set it to 100%. I'm going to set it back to off. Glide here is a pretty cool feature. So if I add a little bit of glide, which is set in milliseconds, what's going to happen is that, I'll just set this back to monophonic. What's going to happen is that every subsequent note is going to have a pitch bend in between it. So this is what it would sound like. And that pitch bend time can be set by clicking and dragging over here. So if I set this to 700 milliseconds, that means the pitch bend is going to take 700 milliseconds between subsequent notes. Now this even works in polyphonic. The bend range is for your pitch wheel on your MIDI controller. So right now my pitch up is set to 2, but I can change that up to all the way up to 36, or I can leave it at 0. So when I move my pitch wheel, nothing happens. That's for pitch up, which is linked right now to pitch down. So pitch up and pitch down are same. If I set this to 5 or 4, pitch down is also going to be 4 semitones. But I can change this to a different value, like let's say 12. So let's try this out. I'll just create an empty region, enter in some notes here. Let's turn off the glide for now. So we're going to pitch bend up 4 semitones, and we're going to pitch bend down 13 semitones. So that's basically your pitch bend range control. Okay, so let's look at oscillator start now. There are 3 options here: free, soft, and hard. Let me simplify the sound a bit and just use one oscillator, and we'll set it to sine wave. Now when it's in free mode, every time I play a note, you should hear a click. Well, not every time. You hear a click sometimes, and sometimes you hear the click soft, and sometimes you don't hear the click at all. That's because the oscillator is moving freely. But if I set this to soft, the oscillator always starts from the middle 0 position. So we never hear the click. If I set it to hard, the oscillator always starts from the positive 1 position. Or in other words, the highest value. So you always hear the click. And in free, we hear the click sometimes, and sometimes we don't, because it's freely moving. So that's oscillator start. Filter reset, I'll explain when we get to the filter section.